There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. And this is a very special cat you're about to watch. This is one of my favorite writers, Ellen Hawley. She's American, but she's been living in the UK since the mid 1950s, I think. No, not that long, but she's been
No,
living there a
not that, not that
long
long.
time.
That's
Long
17
time.
years now.
17 years. And her novel that came out earlier this year is called A Decent World. And what is this novel? Book number 6?
Number 5.
Book number 5. It's the second book of hers that I've read. In 2022, I discovered her through this novel, Other People Manage, which was one of my top reads that year. And Ellen and I had a lovely chat about that at the time, and that will all be linked in the show notes. Ellen, welcome back.
Good to be here.
Lovely to see
One
you.
of my favorite podcasters. Actually, my favorite podcaster.
Well, that means a lot. Let's keep the mutual admiration comments going for a while, and then we'll get us both in a good mood. No, what I would like to start this chat with is have you read the opening of the book? It's kind of, and tell me what do you call it? Do you call it a preface or what?
I didn't think of it as a preface. The opening feels right
opening,
to me.
Kind of short little chapter. Yeah.
Toward the end of the first real conversation we ever had, David Freund asked if I still thought I could change the world. Still, he said, as if we'd been arguing about this for years. Although before Josie, my grandmother, and his sister died, we'd never seen each other. She'd been the stopper in the family bottle, keeping him neatly contained and out of our lives. And now that she was gone, he was pouring into my life. Already he thought he knew what was inside my head, which pissed me off, particularly since he was right. I'd seen him twice since Josie's death, and we hadn't managed much in the way of conversation either time. Here I was, though, sitting stiffly on his brocade sofa, trying not to spill the coffee he'd given me. I quoted Margaret Mead at him. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. It felt odd saying indeed out loud, but the quote demanded that kind of formality. Besides, it matched his furniture. He blew a stream of air through his lips as if it was exactly the sort of answer he'd expected. I told myself I was a stand-in for the version of Josie he carried in his memory, and the whole scene seemed as natural as it did ridiculous. I'd borrowed my quotation from a battered poster still taped to Josie's basement door, so in a sense it was her answer. As a kid, I read the words so often that I'd stored them on the mental shelf where our most fundamental beliefs share space with our platitudes. Safety is fragile. If we drop things, they fall. A small, committed group of people can build a just society. Long after I left David's house, our answer, Josie's and mine, bounced around in my head. Did I still agree with it? Mostly. Partly. Entirely. I couldn't face a life where I didn't. But it was easier to believe if we were talking about the small things. I'd started to wonder about the big ones. Josie never did. The Soviet version of socialism had shaped her life, but even after the Soviet Union collapsed, she held steady. A small group of committed citizens, etc. I don't remember the collapse. My entire experience of Josie, not to mention the world, dates from the post-Soviet era, with capitalism triumphant and crumbling and our lovely spoiled planet floating like a lobster in a pot of warming water, while we, the complicated little parasites who live on its back, tell each other we're still okay. Believing we can change the world has never been easy, and it's at least as hard to think we can't. But to the extent that I still did believe it, was it because I'd weighed the evidence or because Josie had raised me to? Was it because giving up that belief would mean living without hope? Did I believe it the way other people believe in God and guardian angels and a higher purpose in the universe? I could answer yes or no, passionately, to every one of those questions.
Well, because that is such a perfect opening to the novel, it's also the perfect opening to this discussion about the novel. I mean, it's all there, densely compacted. Compact doesn't fit quite the nuance that I want, but it's just all there, all the energies and questions and personalities swirling through the novel. Ellen and I don't think that this is a novel that's particularly easy to spoil, but there's a couple things that happen later or that are revealed to the reader later in the novel that we are going to put behind a spoiler wall. So we are quite confident that until you hear me say, okay, the rest of this conversation is behind the spoiler wall, that you can listen and nothing will be spoiled for you. So the setting, the present day of the narrative is January 2012. And the temporal setting is important. It's what, about 6 weeks, 7 weeks after Occupy Wall Street has come down. And our main character, Summer Dawidowitz, was she in her late 20s, something like that? Or is she 30?
Late 20s, early 30s.
We can see her personality already in that. How would you describe Summer?
Summer is a woman who's looking for a political home. She's looking for a personal home. She was abandoned by her mother, raised by Josie, her grandmother. Is absolutely passionate about Josie. This was the stability in her life. These are Josie and Sam, her grandfather, but Josie is the one who's the last one to die. And with Josie's death, all the safety has gone out of Summer's life. And she's in deep
certainties,
mourning.
yes.
Yeah, all the certainties.
Certainties
And while she isn't convinced of Josie's certainties, she envies them.
And she is always questioning everything. And like that passage that you read ended, she's of two minds about a lot of things in a way that makes her incredibly intelligent and kind of slippery as a character in the novel. I sensed other characters, not just her family, struggling to kind of get a grasp on who she was. I think it's because of this being in this transition, this grief-laden transition phase. She was kind of all over the place, wasn't she?
Well, in the sense of where she's going, yes, and what her life is gonna look like. But at the same time, as I see her anyway, it's interesting to hear you talk about her that way. Because as I see her, she is there's an honesty about her. She is who she is. She doesn't change to please people, really. When she tries to please her uncle for various reasons, it doesn't come easily to her, and she's not very good at it.
Right. So I'm so glad you said that so that I can kind of go back and revise what I was trying to say, because no, absolutely. The conflicting things she's sorting out for herself, all of her responses are authentic.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
She is not a people pleaser. No. And I
Mm-hmm.
think she comes by that honestly when we meet the rest of her family. Tell us about Summer's family. And should I put a time limit on this? Because oh my goodness, what a conflictual, fascinating group of people.
It's a complicated family. Summer's mother is a singer, Zan, with a great voice and completely self-absorbed, and who abandoned Summer when she was 5 to be raised by her grandparents. And Summer has never really been able to forgive her, and probably never will, because every time she does, Zan does something else to infuriate her. Her aunt, Caro, has an allergy to her parents' politics. Her parents were communists. I should start there. Josie and Sam were communists during the 1950s, the American Red Scare, which was a tough time to be communist. They had 3 children. Zan, who was the youngest and who I talked about, Caro, who was the oldest and who grew up with an allergy to politics. Her sense was, this is not safe, I want no part of it, and leave me alone. And Jack, who was the middle child, who became a professor of 20th century American history and is political but not an activist, and is very close to Summer.
And so it's implicit in the passage that you read, but really the story opens with Summer's beloved grandmother, Josie Dawidowitz, taking her last breath. And so she has died. And so then the family has to make a whole bunch of decisions, including most, immediately what's going to happen for a memorial service or whatever in the obituary. And so we see them all together, and it is just they really they're not used to all being in the same room, and things don't necessarily go well. And we see a lot of those relationships play out over the rest of the novel. But seeing them, bringing them all together at the very beginning of the novel, really sets up the complicatedness and thorniness of a lot of those relationships. As if that wasn't enough, Summer's personal life is a bit complicated. Tell us about the household.
Summer has fallen in love with a woman who she's known since they were kids, Shar. And Shar is part of a polyamorous household, which suits Shar well, but has not been an easy fix for Summer. So when Josie had a stroke, Summer moved back in with Josie to take care of her, to nurse her, and just to be there for her. And so the question in her mind is, does she really want to go back to this household or not?
That's right. So that's another one of the central questions that she's living out and grappling with in the novel. My favorite passage among many favorite passages in the novel is about when she goes back to the house, just I think at the morning after Josie's passing. And if you could read that short scene about when she
Sure.
meets Shar.
I unlocked their front door and walked into the full scream of the vacuum. Shar caught sight of me and fumbled for the power button, yelling over the noise for me to wait, reminding me of someone struggling with a dog that outweighed her. She hit the button and the scream curved downward into silence. Hey, she said. She was still holding the vacuum and couldn't seem to free herself from it. Josie died, I said, last night. I stood at the edge of the rug, hands inside my jacket pockets, each one clutching a glove. She leaned the vacuum wand against the wall, and we watched it slide, neither of us making a move to catch it, flinching in unison when it clattered to the floor, as if the sound had surprised us, as if Josie's death had. She moved toward me, and I shook my head, saying no to something. No, don't be kind to me, don't cry, don't touch, don't speak. Although what had I come there for, if not for all of that? It's what she wanted, I said, since the first stroke. It felt right to say this, as if I owed Josie bluntness. All the same, she said. She told me to take off my jacket, and it seemed natural that she had to tell me this. Here, sit. I let her park me on the couch, and she sat next to me. I'll miss her, she said. I thought the words, I know you will, but couldn't say them. She'd known Josie since we were kids, and that helped anchor me to the planet. We held hands for some time before we turned toward each other. She touched her forehead to mine, laying her hand across the back of my neck, and we rested there until something inside me opened to her. An unquestionably physical feeling that didn't match any physical event and was more intimate than any kiss I've ever known. I spread my hand across the back of her neck in an echo of her hand on mine, and my mind stopped pumping out thoughts, just marveled at the wave of feeling that lifted us. And then, slowly, it set us down. I folded back into myself. She folded back into hers. We kissed, light and sweet, and we separated. You want to go upstairs? I asked. I hadn't known that sex could grow out of the same ground as loss, but it did, and I followed her up the stairs to her room.
That is just one of the most achingly beautiful passages that I've read in many a year, and I think it speaks to me. And I'm not. This is not going to be an autobiographical, confessional type of conversation, but for me, two of my most significant relationships, including the one that I'm in now, began where my partners were in grief. And so the connection between sex and desire and loss and grief is something that's really personal for me. And this was just gorgeous. So I had to text you when I put the book down and texted you because to tell you how much I love that passage. So thank you. Tell us a bit more about Josie and her politics.
Josie became a communist at a time when, actually, at an odd time, during the 1930s, during the Depression, the Communist Party in the US grew massively. Josie became a communist later, a bit later than that, as we're going into the war. which is an unpopular time to have joined, and hung in there through the 50s. For her, it was the title, A Decent World. For her, it was a way to build a decent world. She grew up in a very privileged family, looking at the poverty of the world around her and knowing that this was insane. This shouldn't be. And for her, it was all about how do we build a decent world. We don't get off too deeply into the politics of the Soviet Union, but she hung in there through the revelations about the Stalin period with the sense of, well, they've corrected their course, and this is still the only way forward for her.
And you have said, I think to me, in previous chats, and I read an interview that you gave to somebody else about this novel, that you had some trepidation about putting this story out into the world. And I think that was related to the politics of it.
Very much so. I'm a child of the 50s. I was born in 47. I grew up during the Red Scare. My parents were communists. I learned that there was a lot you couldn't talk about, and you just sort of had to thread your way through all the things that were forbidden, all the things that were too damaging to talk about. And so, to come out with a book like this, I started it a long time ago with the sense that I would never be able to publish it, but if I didn't write it, I'd never be able to write anything else. It was just there. It was a wall I had to get past if I was going to go on. So I wrote it anyway. And when I actually found a publisher for it, I wanted to write back and say, "Are you sure? Are you sure this is a good idea?"
And have you encountered any of that reaction?
Well, surprisingly, no. In part, times have changed. In part, I'm in the UK, and it's been published in the UK, not in the US.
Right.
Britain has not been as, if you say socialist in Britain, people don't fall over.
That's true.
It's
right.
I think in the US, that's probably changing. I mean, Bernie Sanders ran a very credible candidacy for the presidency as a socialist. He also was attacked a lot for it, but still, times have changed.
What went into your decision to set it? Because it sounds like it's a very personal story in many ways, and you have chosen a protagonist from a different generation. Can you talk about how that unfolded?
It's an interesting question. It wasn't a rational choice. What I knew about this book at the beginning was not that it was political. I knew there was a mother and a daughter involved. I knew they were estranged. One of them was performing the only scene I had in my head was one of them was performing at a club, one of them was singing, and the other was outside and either was going to go in or wasn't going to go in, and I wasn't sure which. That scene never made it into the book, but that was all I started with. It turned out to be the daughter's story, not the mother's, and the mother turned out to be the singer. I didn't know who was who in the beginning, even that much. I mean, I don't plot a book out to begin with. I have a thread, I pull on it, and I see where it takes me. And it's more like unraveling than plotting.
I was reminded of, and I've forgotten the character's name, I should have looked it up. In Other People Manage, there was a mother-daughter dynamic, and where abandonment was a big part of that relationship. It was Peg's sister and niece.
Yeah.
Right? The Peg's sister leaves the kid and with
you're
her
getting
sister.
A pattern here.
Right.
Again, you've got a mother abandoning a child.
Yes.
That one came out of, it sort of evolved out of a woman I worked with 100 years ago I was about, my God, I must have been about 20. And she was probably a couple of years younger. She might have been 20. She hadn't been married long. She had one child, and her sister abandoned two children, and she just took them in without batting an eyelash. And I mean, she was heroic. And her strength has stayed with me. I don't know why kids are always getting abandoned in my novels, but they do seem to.
It's a theme that, as an adoptee, I relate to, so it's probably why I noticed it. Yeah.
Other people have commented on it too, and I don't know quite what to tell you about it, but yes, that happens.
Maybe one more question before I put up the spoiler wall. We don't have to talk too much about Zach. We could, but really the question I have is about gender. Part of what Summer is kind of sorting out or coming to terms with or realizing it has to do with gender. And that largely crystallizes around Zach's character. And I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that.
Interesting question. I'm not quite sure what to say. Zach is one of Char's lovers and lives in the household, and he is one of those one of those men, and they do form a category, who think of themselves as liberated and non-sexist and suck all the air out of the room and act in very traditional ways and are totally clueless about it.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that description. Plus, you did his character a service because you actually made him more full-bodied than that. But that is all absolutely true about him. And this is one of the lines I marked. He couldn't cook without calling for applause. And I noticed this the way an anthropologist might for what it said about men and women and the effort it took to change culture. I thought, oh, yeah, I know men like that. And I probably have been that way at times, sadly enough.
We are all products of our world, and
Right.
some of us more than others, and some of us more conscious of ourselves than others.
That's right.
He's an enthusiast. He's not a deep thinker.
Let's put up a spoiler wall now. There isn't a whole bunch that really is spoilery, but let's talk about some of the things that happened closer to the end of the story. So we find out other than what you read at the beginning, which shows Summer meeting with her uncle David, who she had never met, and meeting him when he's elderly and her grandmother has just recently died. We haven't really alluded to the fact that there was a estrangement between Josie and her brother David, and the details of that come to light, and that ties the personal and the political together in a really intense way in this story. David is gay, and
They blackmailed him
they blackmailed him.
during
Yeah.
the 50s, when being gay was as dangerous as being a communist, to shop his sister to the FBI,
So he
which he
basically,
did.
yeah. So he informed on them, and that was the beginning of. There were other conflicts or differences of opinion between them, but that was really the event from way back when that caused that breach. So again, the political aspects of sexuality is very much a part of that story. And David is the one with all the money. So
David
money
is
and
the one with
family.
all the money. Yes, indeed.
Yes, and
Josie, in becoming a communist, broke with her family, and her parents basically disowned her. And David took over a small family business, and did very well with it, and has quite a bit of money. Summer is a fundraiser and is raising money for the organization that Josie founded, which tutors school children and pushes the school system to do better, basically. So she is trying to court Mr. Moneybags, and he is a very sweet, very manipulative guy. It's not going smoothly.
I love the way that was left rather open ended. And I want to maybe have a few questions later on about the ending. But basically, Josie very reluctantly accepted her brother's money. She didn't want to have anything to do with him. As far as the story goes, we don't know that they ever really had any contact other than that he financed this agency, this organization that she created, Talk.
Having gotten her fired as a teacher, he felt terrible, and
Yeah,
he starts pressing money on her to clear his conscience.
right.
And she would love to have been able to say, to hell with you, and give it back, but very reluctantly takes it, finances this organization with it.
And Summer inherits that same dilemma when Josie passes,
Yes.
because what's going to happen to the organization, and will the mysterious, never before seen Uncle David continued to finance it, and that's an important part of how the story plays out at the end. It ties into so many of the other things that you're exploring in the novel. I was intrigued by, and I wasn't surprised particularly, but I was intrigued by the way that Che Guevara showed up in the novel and Summer's kind of evolving, is that the right word? Evolving relationship to what he stood for. Can you say anything about that?
Well, Chay, as a child, she imagined going off to the mountains to fight with Chay, and she was going to be this wonderful revolution. Chay was already dead, mind you, but kids' fantasies, who cares? She has never known who her father was. She never will know who her father was. Her mother isn't, has told her so many different stories about who it was that she's given up on the idea. So she basically invented a father figure for herself, and that was Chay. And at this point, she's old enough to look at Chay and think, yes, he makes a great revolutionary icon, but God, did he blow it? He totally misjudged his time, his place, the politics that were involved in starting a second revolution. And it was a disaster. But, that's still the fantasy father figure that she holds.
And I just thought that there was something so nuanced about the shifting nature of how she related to him compared to how, in a similar way to Martin Luther King, the popular culture has, you can buy the t-shirts and this and that, and nobody knows a damn thing about him, right? Just like
Yeah.
MLK, right? So no, I
And
love that.
they've taken all of the elements of what he did and what he thought and what he said that were dangerous and just edited those out. So you get this very nice, acceptable figure that you can trot out in February for Black History Month.
Oh, I want to touch on this one. Another of my favorite scenes is, I think it was Josie's last outing, one of her last outings. Summer and her other people from the household, they took her out down to Occupy Wall Street, right?
It was the local Occupy. It wasn't
The
Wall
local
Street.
Occupy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Minneapolis.
She made a rather
Yeah, that's
prescient
where
comment when she was there.
Zach says, sort of grandly throws his arms out and says, "Look, this is the revolution," and she says it's going to take more than this.
And she was right.
By this time, she's had a series of small strokes. Her language is limited. So what she has to say is, if it's at all on track, it's very blunt and it's very to the point. She doesn't have the leeway and the kindness she once would have had.
Another big theme, I think, of this novel is home. And I don't know how you get these fabulous covers, or who, if maybe you'll tell us a little bit about the covers, because both of these novels they have similar covers of homes and striking cover images. And in several ways, home is such an important part of this story, as it was in Other People Manage. But here there is a social, political, economic aspect to it. So tell us about home in this novel.
Especially because Summer has lost so much in her life. Home is very powerful. And Josie's home is left meticulously to her 3 children and her grandchild, divided in 4. And as the book goes on, Summer realizes, I don't want this place to be sold. I need, I need this base in my life. I'm sure if it's sold, she'll live without it. She will go on, but she wants that for herself, and she wants to buy it from the other 3, which is its own bone of contention within the family, because she doesn't have a huge raft of money to come up with. I don't know where the cover came from on the other one. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I'm convinced it's Milwaukee Avenue in Minneapolis. I'm just sure of it. But how they found it, I don't know. The cover of A Decent World, though, is it's from a painting by a Minneapolis painter called Brendan Farley. And a friend of mine was putting a lot of his work on Facebook, and it's from my old neighborhood, the Longfellow neighborhood, and I really love it. It's very evocative. Swift
You
Press came up with a cover which I hated. It was suburban. It was an apartment building. It was sterile. And one of the lovely things about them is that I could go back to them and say, no, you can't do this. And they backed off. And I gave them a link to Farley's work, and they followed it and bought one of his paintings, and for the use of it, not the painting. And there it is, and it's beautiful. I just love it.
there's something about the illumination, the lights on that you can see through the window that just exudes the emotional quality of being at home. There's a lot of hominess and the emotional kind of satisfaction and connection that comes through those windows somehow. Yeah,
There's a sense that you could walk in there and there'd be warmth, and there'd be the best of what's family, and there'd be love,
absolutely.
and quite possibly cake.
And I would maybe add a cup of hot chocolate. Just I think hot chocolate when I look at that picture. And of course, there's the socio-economic, the social political aspect. So this is just in that Occupy Wall Street era, and homes are being foreclosed on, if that's the right word. And so that's a
Yep.
big part of the story as well, because there's a neighbor, and maybe this is Irene's house here. Tell us about
Irene is
Irene.
across the alley, but Irene is about to lose her house, and in the end does lose her house.
Yeah.
And with all that what that means for the loss of a home and the loss of your roots. And I guess I could do a little bit of autobiography in here. I hadn't even put this together until we started talking about it. My mother was a tenant organizer in New York. And in the 1950s, we lived in a neighborhood then called Yorkville, where the old tenement houses were being torn down and luxury high rises were being built. And she and some other people, very likely communists, I don't know honestly, started organizing people to fight back against evictions and try to keep their homes. And they started a small group, which became a citywide group, and which still exists, partly just not only involving evictions, but tenants' rights in general. So I grew up with an understanding of what people lost when they lost their homes.
Well, thank you for giving me that scoop.
I never even put that together until you brought it up.
That's wonderful. Ellen, it's always so wonderful to chat with you. Do you have anything you'd like to say about what's coming next?
Oh, I don't know what's coming next. I'm working on a novel. I'm about 100 pages in, and I'm not sure how I get out of here. It is about political violence in the 70s and in the US today. And we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
Well, at the risk of seeming rude, I'm going to say, hurry up. I want to read it.
Okay, nothing to it. For you, I'll do it.
Thanks so much, Ellen.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed talking with you.